The senator from Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. One of the challenges we face in this era of great power competition is identifying unique threats before they escalate. When it comes to Russia and Ukraine, these threats have come into full focus. Vladimir Putin took off his statesman costume and declared a war of choice on Ukraine. Last week, we received the first public allegations of his intent to unleash Syrian proxies on anyone still standing between his war machine and the territory he covets. I'm glad to hear more of my colleagues speaking up about the unique dangers of proxy wars. Last week, I laid out in detail how Putin has used proxies to install himself in countries that are leadership poor but resource rich. We know that fighters from the Kremlin-backed Wagner Group have slaughtered their way through Africa and the Middle East on behalf of Putin's grand Soviet ambition, and now he's going to do the very same thing in Ukraine. We've also seen Iran unleash proxies and state-sponsored terror organizations in Iraq against American armed forces and against civilian populations in Lebanon, Yemen, and Gaza. In their 2022 threat assessment, the intelligence community stated, and I quote, "We assess that Iran will threaten U.S. persons directly and via proxy attacks, particularly in the Middle East," end quote. This is a public statement. This is the annual threat assessment. It is backed by years of evidence proving that Iran has done this before and they're going to try to do it again. President Biden should be doing everything in his power to keep this threat as far away from American citizens as he can. But no such luck. The impending nuclear deal he's trying to hand Tehran unlocks billions of dollars for Iranian banks, companies, and other entities that finance violence. Where does the White House think that money will end up? We know there's nothing Tehran loves more than a power vacuum. They've invested heavily in Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Hamas, all terror organizations hunkered down in some of the world's most unstable regions. Over the past decade, the Iranians have spent more than $16 million on carefully targeted bloodshed. That's right, Madam President. Iran alone, the largest state sponsor of terrorism. The landscape is chaos, and still the Biden administration is pushing the world toward a sanctions relief scheme that would empower the Iranians to terrorize and subjugate even more people. The regime in Tehran is a menace. This week, incoming CENTCOM commander General Kurilla said as much in his confirmation hearing when we asked him how sanctions relief would affect the Iranian influence. And I'm quoting him, "There is a risk with sanctions relief that Iran will use some of that money to support its proxies and terrorism in the region. And if it did, it could increase risk to our forces in the region," end quote. This week's CENTCOM posture review before the Armed Services Committee, outgoing Commander General McKenzie acknowledged these concerns about sanctions relief, saying, and I quote, "There is a risk that they could use that money in ways that we would not want them to use that money. That is right," end quote. We certainly don't want them to put one more penny toward those proxy wars for good reasons. First, proxies don't just parachute in and declare victory. They brutalize entire populations and use weapons that these hostile regimes wouldn't normally have access to. Second, Because proxies operate outside the law, the rogue regimes that hire them maintain plausible deniability. Third, this plausible deniability creates a false sense of security that allows hostile governments to pull up a chair to the negotiating table and pretend to fit in with normal countries, all the while denying the U.S. access and placement. We have a limited number of ways to deter hostile regimes from waging war on the civilized world. The West failed the people of Ukraine in this regard, but it's not too late to change course. Ronald Reagan once said, and I'm quoting him, "War comes not when the forces of freedom are strong, but when they are weak. It is then that tyrants are tempted," end quote. He believed in achieving peace through strength, and so do I. It's pretty simple. If you don't stand up for yourself, you'll get run over, and if you don't stand up for your friends, there may not be anyone left to help them when the wolves are actually at the door. When I talk to Tennesseans about this, the one thing they want to know is why President Biden makes decisions that make this country more vulnerable and less safe. Whether through lifting sanctions on Iran, slow-walking sanctions on Russia, or keeping our economy entangled with China's, Biden has refused to lead. Forget doing what needs to be done. He won't even say what needs to be said. He's fearful, and he is scared to anger the new axis of evil. He's scared to anger one more timid ally in Europe. He's scared to anger the radical left here at home. Is there anything that he is not afraid of? He is so weak-kneed in the face of adversity that he can't even bring himself to finish building the fence that would secure our southern border. I want to focus on that border security for just a few minutes because while Russia and Iran might dominate headlines, for Tennesseans, our wide-open southern border is a perfect example of what can happen when a president concedes national security to score points on his political rivals. Border encounters were up in February. That's almost 165,000 people trying to enter the country unnoticed. 76% of the people the Border Patrol caught were single adults. Cocaine seizures increased to 83%, meth 97%, heroin 173%. We know for a fact that terrorists and members of international criminal organizations cross our border with impunity. Over the course of 3 days last December, Border Patrol arrested a guerrilla member of the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, 4 MS-13 gang members, and an 18th Street gang member. Madam President, six distinguished representatives from the most dangerous gangs in the entire world, and they almost disappeared into the country undetected. Thank goodness for law enforcement, because these are not ordinary criminals. In January of 2021, the Department of Justice indicted the 14 most senior members of MS-13 on charges of conspiracy to support, finance, and commit acts of terrorism. Is this the Biden doctrine? Choosing vulnerability over security, annihilation through weakness, and who exactly does the president intend to win over with this approach? Ukraine will find no peace in the easing of diplomatic tensions on some UN panel. Children in Africa won't have a future if we start writing checks to proxy fighters. The people of El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras won't be better off if we enable the drug dealers and sex traffickers who make a living exploiting their families. No matter where in the world you look, you can see the cost of Joe Biden's willful blindness to danger. He has the tools he needs to protect the United States from these threats. Now he needs to use them. It's time to stop relying on foreign oil and make the country energy independent again. Finish the Keystone Pipeline. Do an Operation Warp Speed for energy. Allow oil and gas exploration on federal land. We have to stop leading from behind when it comes to preventing Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons. President Biden must submit any deal with Iran to Congress. And rest assured, we will block implementation of anything the White House tries to sneak under the radar. We must pay attention to the flow of money and power in proxy hotbeds and recognize the danger posed by these terrorists for hire. And we can't neglect security threats close to home. It's time to secure the border and give our law enforcement officials the resources they need to catch terrorists and gang members before they disappear into the country. Tennesseans can't identify with the president's refusal to lead. They're confused and frightened, but they also have faith in our ability as a country to pull out of this skid. They believe in the promise of America. All they want is for their president and elected leaders to prove that they also believe in this country. I yield the floor.